I think the panelists I was sitting with who use large language models were ready to hang me, and I think there were some rotten tomatoes were pulled from the ground and thrown in my direction pretty quickly.
Hello and welcome to the Test Community Network Weekly Update. My name's Tim Burnett. Really special session today. We've got Paul from Vantage, and we're going to be talking about his experiences as he went on a world tour, really, of lots of conferences and events from the assessment space. And this really took him around the world, with he started in Berlin for the EATP conference. Lots of updates to come as ever. If you want to know more, you go to testcommunity.network. If you want to subscribe to the Test Community Network, then do that. You get a free email, comes through every week, which has got a concise kind of view of all the amazing events, content that I've been sharing out, podcasts that have gone on. So it's a really good kind of digestible piece of information for you. Some events that are coming up this week. So we've got the FECT National Future of Education Technology session. This is how career and technical education is transforming. We have also Java Jams. This is a higher education assessment webinar that they run, and this is going to be the last in the series before Christmas. That's based over in the North America. So if you're interested in higher education and assessment, then please do check that out. ATP Global Education Division, I've got a webinar, A Better Way to Test. That's available on the 13th, so please have a look at that. We've got TSEEC, Spotlight on Item Generation and Language Testing. So if you're into language testing, then I do recommend you look into that one. Other podcasts and information, so the Educational Duct Tape has got Dan Fitzpatrick, the amazing Dan Fitzpatrick, who's also actually started up his own daily podcast as well, which is sharing stories from the educational space around the use of AI as well. So it's worth checking out. But there is talking about Magic School, School AI, Drift, Brisk, Gamma, some really quite cool tools that are being kind of explored within the educational space. Then we've got Regulation Matters, Clear Conversation, episode 84, demonstrating regulatory evidence, part 2. We've got the Exam Man. So this is a podcast that I've been listening to for a few episodes now, and they've got Graham Hudson on this week talking about digital exams. And Graham shares his views about whether or not I suppose we should be pursuing digital exams for things like GCSEs, big high volume on the day exams, or whether or not we should be looking at other alternative approaches to that. And it's quite an interesting conversation. Graham's got over 35 years of experience within this space and is the chair of the Assessment Association. So I recommend you check that out. Other ones here, we've got the Educational Futures Initiative, and that's from Cambridge. It's worth having a look at that. And then I've got 3 up here. So we've got GBT Mark handwritten exams. We've got AI system marking functionality, and then we've got ChatGPT marking. Now, the reason why I've put these on here is I've been playing around with a platform called Replit to try out my own marking app. So using ChatGPT to interpret handwritten responses and then mark them. So if I choose my file here, so the desktop, I've got a handwritten student response here. I'm going to extract the text from that. So that's going to send that handwritten response off to ChatGPT via the API. It's going to transpose that into actual type text, and it does a reasonably good job. I've been kind of checking it as it's gone through. I've got the marking scheme that I pasted in there, and then I'm going to grade that essay. So what's going to happen here is it's going to then use the reasoning model to look at the response by the student, looking at the text, and then also then looking at the marking scheme and marking that student's work. And it's going to give me a score. There we go, level 3, 10 marks have been awarded by the AI. Where I want to go with this next is to add on a layer where the human marker can agree or disagree and add their own marks, etc., against the AI's marking tool. So this is me kind of playing around with the OpenAI API technology to be able to kind of extract marking results. So it's quite good fun, actually. So it's worth checking out. It's on the Test Community Network Beta Labs area. There's a few other solutions on there as well, so it's worth having a look at that. So on to the main part of the conversation today. Here's me in conversation with Paul talking about AI ethics and his world tour. So over to me and Paul. Thank you very much. I hope you're well.
Yeah, I am. Thanks so much for having me.
Excellent, excellent. And now, you just introduce yourself very quickly to people who don't know anything about you, if they don't know your kind of presence on the ATP arena and the network. Just tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Sure. Paul Edelblut, Vice President of Global Operations at Vantage Labs. We're a US-based technology provider that does about 100 million assessments a year. That's a large number because many of them are done through API services using some of our AI technologies. But all of you are probably users of our technology every day and don't realize it, as we built the grammar checker and spell checker in Microsoft Office. And if you're not a Microsoft lover, if you have an iPhone or an iPad, if you go under the little gear and the general about legal notices, you'll see about 14 of our linguistic patents that allow Siri to talk to you in a natural language way. So we do quite a bit on the global scene and touch about 2.2 billion customers a day with our software.
Wow, that's brilliant. Thanks for that. And I think, yeah, it's one of those things where you don't necessarily realize the technology that's sitting behind all these solutions and platforms that you work on. You've just been a bit of a world tour, haven't you? You've been, I think, was it every conference that was going this fall around the world, or did it feel like it?
It certainly felt like it, especially I had two travel days that exceeded 40 hours, which were brutal. But I started off in Berlin with the European Association of Test Publishers, a very interesting conference, lots of excitement and discussion around the European AI Act. I headed on to the Middle East with a quick stop in Qatar, on to Oceania, down to New Zealand and all over Australia, before popping north to Taiwan, Thailand, Malaysia, hitting Seoul just before the martial law, and headed back home just in time for our Thanksgiving holidays.
Excellent. Lots of air miles there. Plenty of airport food as well as flight food as well, I'm sure, consumed on the journey. So tell me about some of the trends then. You what kind of things have stood out to you along the journey? You mentioned Berlin at the start, the EU AI Act as the kind of starting point. Tell me about that. What's been your experience with that so far?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things going on with the European AI Act. First off, we have always said that we find that the European markets are overregulated and balkanized a little bit, making them a challenge to do business in. I think the European AI Act has a lot of people nervous and scared, and I think it's so onerous and so penalty laden that I think a lot of companies are just going to sort of ignore it and try and fly under the radar, to be honest with you. In fact, we have a client in I'll call it the government space, that's doing work with us and said, just don't even worry about the European AI Act, which I think is not a good advice to take, given the potential penalties. But it really is going to have a chilling effect on the way AI is implemented, whether as part of an assessment scoring solution or potentially item generation solution. And I think there are some great experts in the field like Mark Weinstein and others who really can give you good legal advice, because I'm certainly not a lawyer on this. But I think what it did for us as a business is give us pause about, advancing some of our efforts and initiatives in the European markets.
Yeah, I think Mark's very pragmatic, and I was on a panel with him in one of the sessions at Berlin, and it is great advice, and you kind of feel quite reassured by his presence when he's there as well. It's interesting, I suppose, kind of in terms of things like that's potentially going to happen in America with the new presidency that's coming in. Is there going to be a big jar there between how they view regulation? How Europe, and I suppose as a Brit, as someone's living in the UK, we're not in Europe anymore. In a way, I'm actually quite pleased. Normally, I'd be saying, give me back my European presence. But do you think there's going to be a bit of a kind of jar there between the two?
As an American who was overseas in many different countries in the run-up to our election, it was brutal. As people asked me what I thought was going to happen, and then was sitting in a meeting in New Zealand, and partway through the meeting, this mountain of a man comes bursting in and says, "Where do you live?" And I said, "Excuse me?" And he said, "What state do you live in a great Kiwi accent?" And I said, "I'm from Pennsylvania." He goes, "You're causing all this trouble," because Pennsylvania was a swing state.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are nervous. I did watch the currency. One of the things that we don't talk about a lot in the assessment industry is the true business of it. But I watched currencies start to crater as the election results came out, and that's hard for businesses to then do more business. If you're pushing into the Australian and New Zealand markets, and you could watch literally the value of their currency decline as the election results were being called, and that makes it harder to sell more, frankly. And from a business perspective, that's troublesome. I think, these we'll wait and see, right? It may be a boon for everyone if they do actually do away with the Federal Department of Education in the United States. You might see, a mass exodus of students to studying overseas for university in the future. So I think it's an unknown quantity. Everything with this new incoming administration is a little bit of a question mark because you're not sure how much of it is bluster and how much of it is real feet on the street. We have the competency and to implement these crazy ideas. So
it's going to be definitely wait and see. And you were in Thailand recently for the Asia ATP conference.
Yes.
There was quite a heavy presence from China from there. What were your kind of observations from that event?
Yeah, so a really good, fun event. Huge shout out to the conference committee that put that together. In particular, those of you who may know Cassie Lee from ATA, she worked incredibly hard to put together a great session, as did the conference chair and the chair of the Asian ATP. Really just did a great job of making it feel inclusive and welcoming, and a good opportunity to learn and gain knowledge, which is critically important at those sessions. What stood out to me was the heavy presence of Chinese companies and their initiatives as they talk to you about expanding their footprint well beyond the China market and beyond the Asian market. And I think that's going to be interesting and good for the industry, because it'll put additional pressure on some of the heavyweights in the field who are not U.S. companies, and we'll see what happens there. Back to your original question, I think the challenge could come up because of the relationship between the incoming U.S. administration and the Chinese government. There could be sanctions or could be other restrictions that are put on to Chinese companies that would chill that advancement. But other than that, it was great to see so many countries recognized. There were folks from Australia, from Thailand, from Malaysia, from Indonesia, from China, Hong Kong, Taiwan. Really a great mixing of all of the countries from around that area, sharing ideas, learning, and advancing things.
Yeah, it's excellent. I spoke to Cassie in Berlin. I did an interview with her there. Exceptional, absolutely exceptional. And I've had a couple of the other organizing team members on at various points on the podcast. So I really wish I could have been there. I was quite disappointed. Was there anything that any kind of big topics that kind of crept up that ethics is one that keeps kind of coming up along the way? Was that a repeat topic, or how was that handled?
Yeah, so at both EATP and AATP, this notion of ethical AI came up on multiple panels that I participated in, as well as multiple sessions, right? Everyone sort of, as soon as someone says AI, that's almost always followed by, well, it's ethical AI, right? Sort of disclaimer, which I think is funny that we feel so nervous about that, right? I thought everything we did in our industry was pretty much, we tried to be ethical and above board and science driven. So that always caught me a little bit off guard. But what really bothers me about this ethical AI discussion that we're having as an industry is that the large language models ostensibly have stolen all that content, right? Yeah. And now groups are building tools around this stolen content and saying, well, I didn't steal it. I just licensed it from someone who did. So therefore it's ethical. And I really find that to be disingenuous at best, to say I have an ethical AI policy and yet you're using a large language model, because you're not attributing that content to someone else. And you're not, paying person for the license to that content, the original authors. So I'm struggling with that a little bit. And I think, if the shoe were on the other foot and suddenly ChatGPT and BERT and all the other Claude and Anthropic and all these guys with these large language models indexed all of our item banks, we would be throwing up our hands and literally losing our minds on the fact that that's stolen content. You can't possibly do it. So I think it's a canard in some ways to try and cover up what we're doing, to say we've got an ethical AI statement, but we're using stolen content, behind the scenes.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. How was the reaction for that from the audience? Were you popular in the room? Were you Mr. Popular there?
I think the panelists I was sitting with who use large language models were ready to hang me, and I think there were some rotten tomatoes were pulled from the ground and thrown in my direction pretty quickly. But again, I don't mean to be critical, particularly of those folks, but just it's this notion of I can't wrap my head around how it's ethical AI if it's stolen content, and I understand the need to continue moving forward, but then don't brand everything as ethical AI. Just say we're moving forward in a a meaningful way that's we try to accommodate and respect everyone's rights as we go.
I'm putting one of my articles for my attendance at the Assessment Now conference, which was organised by the British Council in London, goes out this week, and that talks about just reflecting on their conversation about ethics. I'm kind of slightly nervous now. You're going to rip it apart, but please do comment. I do.
Yeah, and these aren't personal attacks. This is just sort of like challenging us to be better as an industry. It's the same thing, the ATP often does conferences in states like Florida and Texas where women's rights are not probably comparable to where they are in other places. And I think we have to, if we're serious about our DEI initiatives and those sorts of things, we can't just say it, but we have to do it. And we have to be true to that throughout.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Yeah, so it's some interesting times, and I'm looking forward to. Obviously, we're kind of winding down into the kind of Christmas period, but things are going to heat back up again. In March will be the Innovations Conference, and you and I are going to be presenting together at that one of the snapshot sessions, which I'm looking forward to. We must find some time to plan that actually at some point.
Yes.
So outside of kind of ATP and the assessment world that we know you in. Where else do you kind of hang out? Where else does Paul go?
So one of the things that I've been doing over the last about 18 months, I was Gina Raimondo, as Secretary of Commerce for the federal government here in the U.S., appointed me to what's called the District Export Council. We have a number of these volunteer organizations where we help support the growth of exports and then inbound investment in the U.S. market. And we've been doing some presentations at ATP conferences, the Vienna EATP, and then most recently at the AATP conference. And I just want to give a quick commercial for the services offered by the local embassy staff of the U.S. embassies, and then there are regional staff here in the U.S. that are focused now heavily on EdTech. There are 35 federal government workers who are working on trying to grow the EdTech exports from the U.S. to other markets and generate inbound investment into the U.S. market. And that comes through the 35 domestic employees plus the embassy staff overseas, because education is the second largest revenue source by gross domestic product outside of healthcare in just about every country in the world. And so it's a huge part of the business, and the government, the US government certainly is doing this. I know the Australian government is doing it. The UK government is doing it at some level. And their services are wonderful. They're phenomenally inexpensive. The Hong Kong embassy put together a presentation for us with 60 human resources leaders, and it was less than $3,000, and they did all the work, set up a breakfast, and we basically showed up, did a pitch for 2 hours to a group of folks while they ate breakfast, and chatted with them about how to assess your personnel before you're hiring them. So strongly encourage you, if you're interested in more in that, please reach out to me, or certainly look up the U.S. Commercial Service or trade.gov, and you'll find a lot of great resources there.
Yeah, it's quite timely actually, because I'm putting together, so I've attended quite a few sessions hosted by people like Jonathan Ledger, who's a kind of UK export kind of expert here. And there was the Federation of Auditing Bodies conference recently as well. There's some great talks and advice given about international kind of operations. So I'm putting together a little bit of a kind of guide based on that as part of my kind of Christmas present to people. So what I'm going to I'll follow up after this, and I'll just ask you for a couple of links just to include in there, just to give people some additional kind of guidance on that. So that's it sounds excellent. Well, wow. So, well, thank you. I feel as though we've been around the world with you just there. All got our emails all topped up. So, well, we'll look forward to seeing you in the new year. I hope you have a great Christmas break. I hope you're getting a bit of time with the family now. No more traveling before Christmas? Are you at home now?
I'm on lockdown so that my wife doesn't change the locks on the doors until January. I head back out to Southeast Asia. If anybody wants to meet up, I'll be in Thailand beginning around the second week in January. So.
Excellent. Okay, well, I look forward to that. Well, you take care, Paul, and
Thanks, Tim.
I'll see you in Orlando, and speak to you soon. Thank you very
Have a
much.
great Christmas.
Cheers. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks for that, Paul. That was excellent. Really enjoyed chatting with Paul there. I'm looking forward to our session in ATP in Orlando as well. So we're looking at avatars as part of that. But more to come, hopefully before Christmas for you. But otherwise than that, remember to go to the Test Community Network website. But other than that, thank you very much, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye-bye.